As you know, on Sunday night or Monday morning of every week, we post a new expository semiotics explaining why we would choose which lectionary readings. But in these readings, our dream is, and our desire is, to help you read the signs and fondle the details and spot the seminal metaphors, the condensed signs and the stories that are key for preaching to a digital culture. So strap on your seatbelt and join us as we prospect our passages for today. There's an old song that you recognize it, I think, when you hear it. So let me just play it for you. And it's a song that you cannot forget once you hear just the first 4 lines. That's all I'm going to play. Here we go.
Got any rivers you think are uncrossable? Got any mountains you cannot tunnel through? God specializes in things thought impossible, and He can do what no other power can do.
Got any rivers you think are uncrossable? Got any mountains you can't tunnel through? God specializes in things thought impossible. God can do what no other power can do. An old gospel song, but it's the soundtrack for the scripture I want to focus on today. Now, this is the 3rd week in Exodus, so I should apologize to some of you, because some of you use a lectionary, you go, it's all about the Gospels, you got to give good news. Well, this is about the gospel, because this is what Jesus did. He specialized in what was impossible. Rivers uncrossable, mountains untunnable. And that's the reason why I want to go with, for the last week, I promised the last week, I can't get out of Exodus. This is the great story of the crossing of the Red Sea. And this is, I just can't, I can't ignore this, because it is so rich and it is so wonderful. There are, again, we got Psalm 114 in its entirety, which we could have done. We have Romans 14, 1-2, which is, which showcases how argumentative the early church was. We think we got problems today with argumentation and disposition and all that. No. And Paul is having to remind the Romans that we do not live to ourselves, that we live for Jesus, and that we have no business treating our brother and sister with contempt, much less our enemies either. And then the Matthew text, the parable of the unforgiving debtor. This is the great text where Peter goes, really? How many times do I forgive? Really? 7? And Jesus goes, hey, 7 times 7. And which means 7 times 7 is meaning there's no limit to how many times you have to forgive. But what I want to do is I'm going to look at this Exodus 14 text. And the reading is 19-31. But I just want to highlight this little passage here. And in great storytelling, sometimes you have a parenthesis. And the parenthesis is kind of puts together the whole story in brief form, and then you continue on with a larger story. And here, in the midst of this lectionary reading, verses 21-29, that's what I want to read today, is this parenthesis, where you're telling the whole story with these bookends. And many times it's one of these kind of parenthetical stories within a story that's going to tell the whole story in the midst of the larger story, because it has bookends that are the same. In other words, the the bookends are almost the same words. So we're going to start with one of the bookends, the beginning of the bookends. Again, this is the great, but to hear this though, you can't think of Cecil B. DeMille's story of Moses crossing the Red Sea with who was it? Sean Connery? Is that who it was? I don't know. You got to get rid of that Moses, okay? Because that was Cecil B. DeMille's version. This is the real biblical version. Here it is. The Israelites went into the sea on dry ground, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. The Egyptians pursued and went into the sea after them all of the Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and chariot drivers. And at the morning watch, the Lord, in the pillar of fire and cloud, looked down upon the Egyptian army and threw the Egyptian army into panic. He clogged their chariot wheels so that they turned with difficulty. The Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the Israelites, for the Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the water may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots and their horses and their chariot drivers." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at dawn the sea returned to normal depth. As the Egyptians fled before it, the Lord tossed the Egyptians into the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the chariot drivers, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed them into the sea, and not one of them remained. But the Israelites walked on dry ground through the sea, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. Now let me just read to you the bookends again, because a lot of the translations, and some of the best ones, miss the nuance. And when I first discovered this nuance and picked it up, I actually went to a Hebrew scholar, and because I'm not that good at Hebrew, okay, and I said, you see this here, but is this in any way significant? And he goes, well, there is a difference in each one, but it's not really significant. And so with that kind of understanding, then some of the biblical translations don't put the difference in print. They just make the bookends exactly the same. So verse 21 and 29 are exactly the same, but they're not. They're not. And here is some of the translations. The NIV doesn't get it right. The New Living Translation doesn't get it right. The NRSV gets it right. The New American Standard Version gets it right. Believe it or not, the King James Version gets it right. The New King James Version gets it right. The English Standard Version gets it right. So here we are, the New Revised Standard Version, and let me give it to you again so you can hear the nuance. Hear the nuance. This is verse 22. The Israelites went into the sea on dry ground, and the best translation were the wall of water on their right and on their left. Now here's verse 29. But the Israelites walked on dry ground through the sea with a wall of water on their right and on their left. Did you hear it? Verse 22. But the Israelites went into the sea on dry ground with a wall of water on their right and on their left. This is verse 29. But the Israelites went on dry ground through the sea with a wall of water on their right and on their left. The person that provides the documentation for this and the midrash on this text that comes out of the Jewish tradition, and where I found final confirmation of this, his name is Louis Jacobs. In 2005, he was voted the greatest Hebrew scholar in the history of Britain. He was born in 1920. He died in 2008, I think, 2005, something like that. But he has been revered as the greatest scholar of the Hebrew traditions and the Torah. And he's written over 50 books. And one of his books is kind of my little secret weapon once I discovered him. And it's called Jewish Preaching. It's a collection of his homilies and sermons. And in this, he's the one who confirms and puts it in the tradition of the Midrash, that the difference between verse 22 here and 29, now originally, of course, the Bible wasn't written in these, you don't have these verses, but these little bookends is huge, huge. Let me read it one more time so you pick up the nuance. The Israelites went into the sea on dry ground. Verse 29. But some Israelites went on dry ground through the sea. Now there's a world of difference between going through the sea and then finding dry ground versus going on dry ground through the sea. So you got two groups of Israelites having different experiences of the crossing of the Red Sea. So you got to get this image of Moses on the bank with his rod out and the water separating, so now they all could go into the dry ground as the waters part. No, that's not how the story goes. You see, there was a group of Israelites who went through the sea, and then they discovered the dry ground. In other words, there were, isn't it amazing? Some of us are hardly willing to get our feet wet in faith, and here were some ancestors willing to drown. In other words, some vanguard group of Israelites had to say, we trust God enough to go what? Into the sea. They went into the water. Now the question is, how far into the water did they go? And this is where the tradition is, this is the Song of Moses. This is Psalm 69. In other words, they went how far before God, how far in faith did they have to go into the water before? And I believe the whole time they're in the water, Moses got his staff up in the air and, okay, I'm waiting. You said you'd part this thing. How far? So here's how far. This is the Psalm 69, and it's, some say it's a psalm of Moses. Save me, O God, for the waters have come up to my neck. In other words, there was a group of Israelites that had enough faith in God to go all the way up to their necks. Now here's the rest of it. I sink in deep mire where there is no footholds. I have come into deep waters and the floods sweep over me. I am weary with my crying. My throat is parched. My eyes grow dim with waiting for my God. And then in verse 15, do not let the floods sweep over me or the deep swallow me up or the pit close its mouth over me. In other words, God honored the faith. God's not just going to part the waters for us without our showing some faith. So there had to be a vanguard group, a leading edge group, a through the sea on dry ground group. Now, there is a question of whether this was a group that came in tribes or whether they were from across tribes, and here, I'm going to give you a Mishnah reading here that posits what it may have been. And this is from a rabbi, Judah. When the Israelites stood at the sea, one said, I do not want to go down to the sea first. And the other said, I do not want to go down to the sea first. And while they were standing there deliberating, actually, who's going to go first? To see what's going to happen as they were standing there deliberating. Nahshon, the son of Abinadab, jumped up first and went down to the sea and fell into the waves. Of him it is said, save me, O God, for the waters are come in, even unto the soul. I am sunk in deep mire where there is no standing. I am come into deep waters, and the floods overwhelm me. So this is an interpretation of Psalm 69 that doesn't have Moses saying this, but the Nahshon. And it also says, let not the water overwhelm me, neither let the deep swallow me up. At the same time, Moses was standing and reciting long prayers before the Holy One. In other words, Moses is on the bank, but he's praying. And he's saying, blessed be he, Holy One, then the Holy One, blessed be he. And so Moses is just saying, blessed be, and then the Holy One finally says to Moses, my friend is sinking in the water and the sea is closing in upon him. The enemy is pursuing, and you stand there reciting long prayers to me? And then said Moses before him, ruler of the world, what then can I do? And God said to Moses, lift up thy rod and jump in. So here we have an account of this crossing that makes it clear that there was a group of, it probably wasn't many, a group of Israelites, maybe it was a couple of tribes that gathered together. Some say it was the tribe of Benjamin that went in first. But there had to be a through the sea on dry ground group. Because clearly there was a group of Israelites that said, I ain't going anywhere till I got dry ground. You show me dry ground and then I'll cross the sea. The point of this is, though, that God saved them all. Even the ones that said, I ain't moving till I got dry ground. God saved them all. But God's not saving anybody until there is a group within the group that is willing to say, I believe you, Lord. I trust you. And if you say, go into the waters and they will part, I will trust you all the way, what? Up to my neck. I'll trust you that far. And we have some people, I call them through the sea on dry ground people, through the sea on dry ground churches. We need some now, because the only thing that's going to get us through these deep waters that we're in is some through the sea on dry ground churches, people, disciples. Paul even thanked in this great passage from Romans 16. He thanked his through the sea on dry ground people that risk it all for him. He comes up with this gallery of through the sea on dry ground people, and starts with Phoebe. Phoebe's the one who took his letter from Corinth and communicated it and was the courier and read it aloud to the church at Rome. And then he's got all these other people, Priscilla and Aquila and Epaenetus, and he just lists them. And all the people who risk everything for him. And we are needing now more and more through the sea on dry ground people. This is going to be this COVID crisis here and this pandemic is catalyzing innovation, creativity, new ways of doing things. But not if we don't have some through the sea on dry ground people. We're going to say, no, I'm not going anywhere till I got safety in front of me, till I can feel safe and I got the dry ground. No, we need some desperately through the sea on dry ground people, on dry ground communities. Faith does not give exclusive title to green pastures and still waters. In fact, faith, a living faith, is more likely to lead you into dark forest and the deep blue sea. Places of danger, places of troubled waters. So we've become very accustomed to, when we were seeing each other out there, and take care. And there were the on dry ground through the sea, take care people. And we do need to take care. But you can't take care of the take care people unless you have some first take risks. Until you have some through the sea that are willing to trust God enough in faith. Now, I think we ought to take risks and take care at the same time. I always thought it was so take care and take risks at the same time that Orville and Wilbur Wright never traveled in a plane together. They would never go up in a plane together. So they're taking care. I mean, you can't take any bigger risk than they did, but they're not crazy. I mean, they're taking risks, but at the same time, they're taking care. So, because if one of them goes, then there's still the other one there to continue on the movement. So, let's be. You can summon your people through this incredible passage here to be, and you can summon your church as we're pioneering and innovating and coming up with all new ways of doing church in this post-COVID world. To be a through the sea, on dry ground church, but not maligning or making fun or mocking the on dry ground through the sea people, because God brought them all through the sea together. But nobody goes anywhere without the through the sea, on dry ground. Vanguard, on the edge, up front. High faith people. Will you be one? Semiotics is the art of angling, of turning things askew, upside down, inside out, cattywampus, sunny side up, over easy, scrambled, hard-boiled. We hope you enjoyed today's journey, but always remember, it's more important you prepare the preacher than you prepare the sermon.